More exploding electronic devices hit Lebanon Wednesday as Hezbollah vows revenge.
It's imperative that everyone avoid taking steps that could further escalate or spread the conflict.
Plus, on fire and underwater, what European leaders are saying about the new normal of extreme weather.
The global reality of the climate breakdown has moved into the everyday lives of Europeans.
Also, a Ukrainian drone strikes a Russian ammunition warehouse. Another American arrested in Venezuela, in a part of the world where there's deepening cooperation with the United States. Today is Wednesday, September 18th, and this is VOA's Flashpoint. Good evening, I'm Lori London. More electronic communications devices almost simultaneously detonated Wednesday after exploding pagers killed at least 12 people and wounded almost 3,000 on Tuesday. Linda Gradstein reports for VOA from Jerusalem.
Although Israel has not taken responsibility for the exploding pager attack Tuesday, it is widely blamed. Israeli security experts say the explosives were implanted into the pagers as they were manufactured. Eyal Pinko is a former Israeli intelligence official.
In order to get this kind of wounds, you need to have between 1 to 2 grams of a type of explosives, which is not a big technological issue. You just need to open the beeper. Once again, it's a whole supply chain. You need to open the beeper to put a very not sensitive explosive that it will not get operated in the time that you don't want it to operate, and a small operational card that can get commands from the outside. If we all remember how a beeper is working, you just send some kind of message from a communication tower, and it's spread all over.
Hezbollah ordered the pagers from a Taiwanese company called Gold Apollo. A representative of the company said the pagers had actually been made by BAC, a Hungarian manufacturer. Pinko said planning technologically complex operations like these takes a long time.
This is intelligence operations that was very well planned, prepared for more than 1.5 years.
Israel is bracing for promised retaliation by Hezbollah, and several airlines canceled flights. But there was no sense of panic in the country, and schools and workplaces were open as usual. Israeli analysts warn that a direct conflict between Israel and Hezbollah would likely escalate to a regional war, and they say Israel would call for U.S. support. Orna Mizrahi is a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv.
I suppose we are going to see more than before attacks from Iraq, Houthis, even direct attacks from Iran, and maybe this time also from Syria. So it's going to be a full-scale war, and we need the Americans beside us.
U.S. officials say they did not know about the alleged Israeli operation in advance and have been working to find a diplomatic way out of the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel says it just wants its 60,000 evacuated residents to be able to return to their homes near the Lebanese border. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Cairo, meeting with his Egyptian counterpart Wednesday, responded to the wave of exploding pagers, an apparent Israeli operation targeting Hezbollah's communications network.
The United States did not know about, nor was it involved in these incidents, and we're still gathering the information and gathering the facts. Broadly speaking, we've been very clear, and we remain very clear, about the importance of all parties avoiding any steps that could further escalate the conflict that we're trying to resolve.
This was Blinken's 10th trip to the Middle East since the war in Gaza began nearly a year ago. He says efforts continue to secure a ceasefire, hostage release deal.
We're focused on getting this ceasefire over the finish line. That would also, I think, materially improve the prospects of actually defusing the situation in northern Israel and southern Lebanon.
With tensions in the region already on a razor's edge, Hezbollah is vowing fierce retaliation. Tuesday's attacks have raised concerns of a wider regional conflict. My colleague Scott Walterman spoke with Michael Domino from Defense Priority for some perspective.
Well, this is a pretty sophisticated intelligence operation. I have little doubt that this was a clandestine operation undertaken by the Israelis. Again, I don't think that we're going to see extensive confirmation of that, in media or in any kind of government statement. But I think that the timing is really notable to me. I mean, you've seen sort of increasing talk and rumors and discussion of potentially a Israeli incursion into southern Lebanon on the ground to try to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River. And now you have this event, which I think took Hezbollah by surprise, certainly. And it also appears the U.S. government was not aware of. So I think, again, we're back in a situation here where things appear to be escalating across the region.
Let's talk about the attack specific. I've seen video. I just watched one a few minutes ago. So this guy standing in a grocery store next to some fruit, and you can see the explosion on his hip. And he falls on the ground and he starts screaming. So these pagers exploded, and a lot of them, hundreds of them, almost simultaneously. It actually was apparently stretched out of over an hour or two. But so let's talk about that, the device, the pagers exploding. Yeah,
so I mean, this is sort of, something that the Israelis have done before. It's a classic sabotage operation, right? You try to identify the types of devices that your adversary might be using. In this case, this very specific brand of pager, and then get your hands on those devices, modify them, right, by adding some sort of plastic explosive. But again, they would otherwise function just like any other device, right? They would actually work to take calls, and they would feel the same, they would look the same, they would be the same weight, right? And then you feed these devices back into the known Hezbollah supply chains where they're sourcing this communications equipment from. And then you basically have a backdoor to do something like this very suddenly if you want to. And so I think the sophistication of the operation really has to be noted here. Again, there's sort of a separate discussion about, the impacts of it or whatever, but the sheer thoroughness of what the Israelis have done here with penetrating this supply chain, finding the right material for all of this, getting it back into the hands of Hezbollah after modifying it, Hezbollah's failure to actually do the operational security measures needed to, check these devices, take them apart, make sure they're not being, compromised either with listening devices or in this case, explosives. They didn't do any of that. And so this enabled, I think, a pretty remarkable day, just speaking of the operation itself.
The other weird thing about this story, I read an article where Hezbollah actually announced publicly that they were getting rid of their cell phones and going to pagers so that their conversations couldn't be intercepted and they couldn't be found through GPS. Right. You probably shouldn't make that kind of announcement.
I would agree with you. And as someone that has worked on intelligence operations and spent a lot of time in the intelligence world, I just find the entire thing, frankly, baffling as far as Hezbollah's own communication security and operational security. I mean, this is just completely unacceptable. And one thing I think is important is, state actors have a lot of resources at their disposal to maintain a high degree of operational security. Non-state actors, terrorist groups, there's more of a drain on your manpower and your time to enforce very strict standards with a lot of this stuff. And it doesn't appear that Hezbollah is doing any of that. And I think, yes, this sort of announcement that, well, cell phones are too vulnerable, so now we're going to go to pagers, just makes pagers the target, right? It doesn't actually absolve you of any of the issues with cell phones as far as penetration or those being compromised as well. So it's really just, you're switching in 6 of one for half dozen of another. And, the Israeli intelligence services are very capable at exploiting any of those devices, as we've seen.
That was Michael Domino with Defense Priority speaking with my colleague Scott Walterman. Moving to Europe, a large-scale Ukrainian drone attack on Russia triggered an earthquake-sized blast. Sean Hogan with Reuters brings us details.
A Ukrainian drone strike destroyed a Russian weapons warehouse in the Tver region, a source in Ukraine's SBU State Security Service told Reuters on Wednesday. Unverified footage shows a huge ball of flames blasting into the sky and multiple detonations. The source said the warehouse in the town of Toropets contained weapons intended for tactical missile systems, as well as guided aerial bombs and artillery ammunition, and that a fire from the blast took hold of a nearly 4-mile wide area. The Ukraine SBU source said it was part of reducing the enemy's missile potential, which it uses to destroy Ukrainian cities. War bloggers and media reported earlier on Wednesday the attack, over 200 miles west of Moscow, was near the site of a large Russian arsenal. NASA satellites picked up intense heat sources emanating from an area of about 5 square miles at the site in the early hours, and earthquake monitoring stations picked up what sensors thought was a small earthquake in the area. Explosions could be heard in the distance as Tver's governor Igor Rudynya addressed local media. He made no mention of the weapons warehouse and said Russia's air defense system successfully shot down unmanned aerial vehicles overnight, with falling debris causing the fire to start. He added that evacuations of residents in the area were underway. Rudynya later said the fire had been put out and residents could return with no recorded fatalities. Russian state media have in the past reported that a major arsenal for conventional weapons was located at the site of the blasts. State media, which is now subject to military censorship laws, was muted in its reporting on Wednesday. Both sides deny attacking civilians in the war fought since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022.
That was Sean Hogan with Reuters. You're listening to Flashpoint from the Voice of America. I'm Lori London in Washington. Just ahead, what leaders in Europe are describing as the new normal. But first, UN rights experts are denouncing worsening repression in Venezuela in the wake of the contested presidential election results. At a news conference, Marta Villanas, chair of the fact-finding mission on Venezuela, says experts' disclosures are overwhelming.
Not only have there been no improvements, but the violations have intensified, reaching unprecedented levels of violence. In the post-election context, we have documented 25 confirmed deaths, most of them young people under 30 years old, from popular neighborhoods.
Meanwhile, Venezuela has arrested a fourth American citizen since the start of this month. The country's Interior Ministry said Tuesday the American was arrested after taking photos of military units, power stations, and state entities. Human rights groups have urged Britain not to copy Italy's approach in trying to reduce the number of migrants arriving on its shores. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer traveled to Rome this week to learn more about its success in tackling migration as a surge of people arrive on small boats across the English Channel. Henry Ridgewell has more from London.
At a makeshift camp outside the French port of Calais, a group of mostly Sudanese migrants waits for an opportunity to reach Britain. Last week, 8 people drowned crossing the English Channel in small boats. The migrants, who asked not to be identified, say they are not deterred.
Everybody here is afraid, but we must take this risk because we want to rise to UK. There is no way another way.
More than 22,000 migrants have made the journey in small boats across the English Channel from France this year. More than 800 people arrived last Saturday alone. It has become a major political issue. Prime Minister Keir Starmer travelled to Italy Monday to learn from its recent success in cutting migration across the Mediterranean from North Africa.
You've made remarkable progress working with countries along migration routes as equals to address the drivers of migration at source and to tackle the gangs. And as a result, irregular arrivals to Italy by sea are down 60% since 2022. So I'm pleased that we're deepening our cooperation here.
Italy has struck multi-million-dollar deals with Libya and Tunisia to stop migrants leaving their shores. Human rights groups accuse those countries of committing widespread abuses against migrants. Rome also signed an agreement with Albania last year to send thousands of asylum seekers there for processing. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni.
Se funziona, If it works, as I hope it will, everybody can understand that this can become a new way to deal with migration flow.
Critics question Italy's approach. Sasha Deshmukh is the CEO of Amnesty International UK.
Amnesty International has some deep concerns as to whether Italy is being compliant with its international legal obligations and its human rights obligations in elements of its approach. What we would hope for would be countries like the UK to have a functioning asylum system, one that considered claims properly but swiftly and dealt humanely with people who are fleeing terrible situations in many cases.
Britain is giving France nearly $600 million over 3 years to boost the policing of French shores, but the number of migrants continues to increase. Starmer said his focus would be on returning failed asylum seekers to their countries of origin and on better intelligence and policing to smash the smuggling gangs. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
More than 100 wildfires stretched thousands of firefighters to the limit in northern Portugal Wednesday. The hot, dry conditions behind the outbreaks in Portugal coincided this week with the worst floods to hit Central Europe in at least 2 decades and left a trail of destruction and a bill for cities and households that will likely be in the billions of dollars. EU Crisis Management Commissioner Janez Lenarse called for financial aid from the bloc's Solidarity Fund to help combat the damage.
We face a Europe that is simultaneously flooding and burning. These extreme weather events that used to be once in a lifetime are now an almost annual occurrence.
And he noted the extreme weather phenomena are proof of a growing climate breakdown. Both the Biden-Harris and the Trump administrations have accused China of unfair trade practices and flooding international markets with artificially cheap goods. Analysts say both presidential candidates, Harris and Trump, are using tariffs to counter China and encourage U.S. manufacturing jobs. VOA's Elizabeth Lee explains how this trade war could affect consumers.
This $6 made-in-China bike bell could cost $9.60 if additional tariffs proposed by Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump becomes reality.
We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases.
Meaning Chinese-made products will be hit with as much as a 60% tariff under Trump's plan. He also says he will implement blanket tariffs of up to 20% on all other countries. Both Trump and the Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris say they want to bring jobs back to the U.S.
A policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century.
The Biden administration kept most of the import taxes put in place during Trump's presidency. In May, Biden announced further tariff increases on $18 billion worth of Chinese imports, including a 100% import tax on Chinese electric vehicles. The Biden administration says its tariffs are more strategic, aimed at specific industries, and that Trump's import tax takes on a broader approach that will cost a middle-class American household $4,000 more a year. Other estimates are in the range of around $2,000. Trump says consumers won't be impacted.
Who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years.
But Chinese businesses are not the ones paying the import taxes, explains supply chain expert Christopher Tang.
During the election years, everyone is promising the moon. But the truth of the matter is that the import tariffs are paid by the U.S. firms.
So for an imported Chinese-made TV purchased at Costco, it's Costco that pays the import tax.
When companies is facing high import tariffs, they have two buttons to push. One is pass the high import costs to the consumers. The other one is squeeze the Chinese factories to lower the price.
Tang says the risk of pushing Chinese companies to lower the price is poor product quality. Import taxes may mean fewer Made in China labels printed, but that doesn't mean that there are fewer imports coming from China. They'll just have a label from a different country, says Tang.
China actually ship a lot of components and parts to Vietnam, to India for final assembly. And those end products actually is still importing into the US as well. So therefore, the total effect on China, they still actually export more, but they're not exporting to US directly.
The World Trade Organization finds tariffs disproportionately affect low-income households, which means a $9.60 bike bell may be out of reach for some consumers if a 60% import tax is slapped on Chinese-made products. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Washington.
And finally today, the United States has deepened its cooperation with allies in the Indo-Pacific region in recent years, including Japan and South Korea. But it's also reaching out to non-allies, including non-aligned countries of Southeast Asia, like Indonesia. VOA's Virginia Gunawan reports.
American troops in the Indonesian province of East Java are teaching Indonesian troops about American football and a more familiar, friendly game of volleyball. It's a welcome bit of downtime for the 2,500 U.S. troops participating in joint military exercises in Indonesia. The Super Garuda Shield military exercises are part of a larger effort to deepen ties in the region. There are also pop-up medical clinics held for residents of the Sidoarjo Regency near where the exercise is taking place. Kelly Greco is a U.S. defense and military analyst at the Washington-based Stimson Center.
That these exercises are primarily a form of defense diplomacy, and they're meant to send political signals. They're often more important about the kind of strategic signals they send than actually the military value of them per se.
The exercises themselves involve some 5,500 troops from over a dozen countries, spanning 2 weeks from the end of August to early September. Among the participants are troops from Canada, France, and Britain, as well as other countries in the Indo-Pacific, including Australia, India, Japan, and Singapore. One major country in the region not participating is China, which has vast territorial claims over the South China Sea. Indonesian military officials reject any notion that the military exercise shows Indonesia is taking sides between Beijing and Washington.
We are not U.S. allies. We only see what are the best practices and what we can adopt for ourselves.
Part of these best practices are in joint command and control shown in amphibious landing exercises involving troops from participating countries. Rahman Yaakob is a Southeast Asian defense expert at the Sydney-based Lowy Institute.
The Indonesian Navy warships is able to communicate directly with the American warships. Kind of exercises is sophisticated, high-end, but with the Chinese, it's a bit different. It's basically basic, simple, passing exercises, signaling exercises with each other. There is one Southeast Asian naval official that shared with me the exercises with the Chinese are so basic that they can be done with fishing vessels.
The Lowy Institute says the U.S. has conducted 525 joint exercises with Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia from 2021 to 2023, making it by far the largest defense training partner with the region compared to other countries like Australia and China. Virginia Gunawan, VOA News, Washington.
And that ends today's program, but there is more VOA coverage 24 hours a day on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of all of us here at VOA, thank you so much for listening. Until tomorrow, I'm Lori London.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA Podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with a 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.